Welcome back to Ottawa Valley Rambles. Today we visit the Middle Portage of the Chaudière. This takes us from Cache Bay on the north side of the Ottawa River to the west end of Brébeuf Park. Please enjoy. So Rick, we've come 1.4k along the river from where we were down at the Chaudière Falls and the first portage, the end of the first portage. Now we've come into what is called Cache Bay now, and can you give us or shine some light on what this would have been like way back when?
First of all, this is the beginning of the second portage, so we think pretty well that we are at where the portagers, the voyageurs, would have come in, because they wouldn't want to go right to the foot of the bay. That just involves so much more walking, and walking they want to keep that to a real premium, and paddling is a lot easier than walking. So the fact of the matter is that this was a bay that has been used for millennia, as all of the portages have been. The Anishinaabemowin name would be probably Ikwewikweed, and Ikwe is women's, and Wikweed is bay, so it's the Bay of the Women. And the reason why it was called the Bay of the Women is an elder has given the history that the women would leave Victoria Island, which was Asinabka, and they would leave and they would come here for a day-long feast. And it was sort of a coming-of-age feast for the young women. So that's where if you look on modern-day maps, you might see the name Squaw Bay, and that would obviously have been a pejorative name given by white man. But funny enough, the Algonquin used the Squaw Bay as well, as the elder used herself. But she said she wishes that in the future that the name would be changed to something more appropriate. So when we look at this bay in the modern era, Andrew called it Cache Bay. That would be the name given to it by both the settlers as well as the voyageurs. Cache Bay because this is where they would unpack their canoes, and they would actually leave some of their heavy packs and some of their provisions in a cache here in this bay before they do the hardest part of the portage to get past to Deschênes Lake. They'd leave a cache here, so it became the Baie de la Cache or Cache Bay, and in the most modern era, it's like when I was a kid, for instance, this bay was known as la Baie des Nus, Nudist Bay, because this would be a place that gay men in the area would like to come, and because they were not out necessarily in society, they could come here and be free and take off all their clothes and bathe nude.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that at all. Traveling this trail today, you'd look out on the water here and you see nice calm water. You'd ask, why would they be portaging from Cache Bay? Well, the fact of the matter is the dam raised the water here 3 meters. So if you go down 9 feet below this water line here, if you lowered the level of the river, you would have the rapids, the little Chaudière rapids that start just after Squaw Bay, which is where we are, or Cache Bay. And you can just see some white water just before we get to the Musette Beach, what we call Musette Beach today. If you look, Andrew, at all the stones on the left and the right, it's like a bit of an escarpment where the stones are all in place. And here you not only have a worn path, but you have rocks that were pulled out in many ways to make steps. And in this one spot right here, you can see that they've actually chipped away at a rock to make a bit of a platform, get a decent purchase. So this is one of the places where likely was part of the original second portage. You know, Andrew, of all the spots on the portage, this is the one spot that we know absolutely is the original portage. This causeway was made by human hands. So people have been walking this causeway for 6,000 years or so. That's 2,000 years before the pyramids were built.
So Rick, we're down at Park Brébeuf, pretty much at the end of the second portage. We've walked through the woods for most of it. We saw some bike path, which a lot of it is covered up by. And now we're in this park with this, what would you call that actually?
Well, that's the Portage Monument.
The Portage Monument. So we're before the final monument that's down there where the end of the portage is. But I wanted just to show how it opens up into this park. And this is, I believe what you described before is that a lot of this was used for camping. Like this is where people would actually stay at one point.
Well, it's possible, yes. I think most of the camping was probably in the upper portage. Once they get past here, might they stop for a break, a little pemmican before they go? But the hardest part of the portage is certainly the next part. Now that portage was difficult compared to the first, the lower portage. But from here on in, it's lining and poling the whole way. And lining and poling takes great skill. And it's the reason they're doing the lining and the poling is because where they're going to be going upriver from here all the way to the upper portage is fairly shallow. And for anybody who's ever done much canoeing, you need a full paddle in the water. You can't be using your paddle against the bottom, and you don't want to break it. So that's why the lining and the poling. But it's kind of marshy ground and soupy ground in some areas, so that's why it would be so difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because the water's quite a bit higher now than it used to be, right?
Absolutely. You'd have the heaviest rapids were right here, I believe. And just ahead of us is where the 19th century meets the millennium-old portage, because there was a timber slide right ahead of us that we're going to go take a look at.
Great, let's go. So Rick, I'm surprised to say that I've actually never heard about this spot that you mentioned that we're going to talk about right now. This is a timber slide, right?
That's right. This was a minor timber slide. It's relatively short, but it allowed the rafts, the cribs, to get past what was a very shallow and choppy section of the Little Chaudière Rapids. So this was probably no more than about 35 feet wide. The slide itself would be about 27 feet wide, and crib by crib they would pass through this slide. It was blasted from the rock and then filled with parallel timbers so that the cribs could slide right down.
So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that they probably broke up the rafts well before they got to all this and then would send each of the cribs down individually.
I would not be surprised, I don't know this for sure, but I would not be surprised that they broke up the larger rafts, which were made up of several cribs, probably above the upper portage at the Deschênes Rapids. And they would bring the cribs, crib by crib, down all the way to the Chaudière Falls. Because certainly at this point here, a major timber raft going over those rapids would be too dangerous. They'd lose too much timber from the rocks beneath the water, because it would be very, very shallow at the Little Chaudière Rapids right here. So that's why the crib was built. was to ensure that the cribs could make it down intact.
So it looks like we're at the end of the portage, or the second portage, not the whole thing. So I guess the next step from here is to head down that way, head west.
Absolutely. This is likely where they would put their canoes in. You're far enough away from the rocks and the current, and you've got a straight paddle to where you get to where today is the Champlain Bridge. And it's right at the Champlain Bridge that you're going to begin to line and pole for a good probably 2 hours, 3 hours before you get to the next portage.
So you're saying that they wouldn't bring the kids to the beach?
Nope.
Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 3 of this series where we explore the upper portage of the Chaudière. Please subscribe and hit the like button to get notifications when new videos are released. See you next time.